Hello, I'm just here at Earth Labs, and it's a pleasure to be here for the first episode of WekWorks. I'm sitting here right now, and we're going to discuss mining. I work at Altitude Capital. Integrity Capital Partners is our registered dealer, and my partner, Gene McBurney, who started with me many years ago at GMP, is now back with me, and that's under the ECM Securities, which is based out of Nassau, Bahamas. I'm going to introduce you to a gentleman here that needs no introduction. He's a legendary investor, a legendary corporate finance partner, and he's now the vice chair of Altitude Capital, David M. Beatty. Thank you for coming aboard, David. I think one of the key things that I always ask people, what brought you back to the industry now, and why are you here back after such an illustrious career? Gordon Capital, the owner and creator of Westwind, you sold to Thomas Weisel. You're back now. It's great to see you here, David.
Thank you very much. You're very kind. You constantly build people up and make them feel special. So,
well, it's about team building, and you know that because we come from the same background. For those who don't know, David, he's done a lot in his past. He'll talk about that, but his nickname is Sharky, and it goes back to the legendary Gordon Capital days when Jimmy Conacher, the patriarch of Gordon Capital, was known as Piranha. They invented the bot deal, and if you were around in the 80s and early 90s, either were eating or you'd be swimming alongside Gordon Capital. They were the dominant firm. They were a powerhouse, and they created what was known as the bot deal, and it goes on and legendary to this day. Is a very, very strong form of Canadian finance. Tell me about your background, David. You've been around the business as long as I have, and you have an illustrious career. And so I want to hear about your background, and then moving forward, where do you think we are, and what brought you back to this market? So we'll start with your history, and then we'll move on from there.
Weck, just like you, worked at Wood Gundy, CIBC Wood Gundy in 1981. Actually got to visit the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. So that was
back in 1981. That was the heyday. Ivan Boesky, and that's what all the Wall Street was made of at that time. That was I've been down the floor, but I started in 82, just after you a year. Yeah. But I remember going in the 80s down to the New York Stock Exchange. What an experience that was.
Yeah, it's fantastic, still is. And then when I joined Gordon, I actually read about Jimmy Conacher and Gordon Capital, and there was an article on the front page of Canadian Business, and it said Gordon Capital trades 72% of the dollar value of the Toronto Stock Exchange on one day and completely dominated. And I said to my dad, do you know anybody over there? And he knew the U.S. salesman, a great guy named Ronnie Goldsack. And next thing I know, I'm in an interview with Conacher asking for a summer job. And the first month that I spent at Gordon was across the way underneath our building in the old Toronto Stock Exchange on the floor with Donnie Bainbridge.
Wow, there's a legend too. I worked with Don. I think Don was probably the most prolific trader in Toronto on the exchange. Yeah, I've never seen a guy that could keep everything in his head. He was so focused. He always showed up at the same time, and he was driven. The best trader that I've ever seen was Don Bainbridge.
Yeah, and then I went up on the desk with Guy Gino, Frankie Constantini.
God bless Frankie.
Paul Braille, Johnny O'Sullivan.
Yes.
Junior guy out on the end, but that's how you learn. So in those days, we all sat in one big room on the 55th floor of the TD Bank Tower.
Yes.
On top a canoe.
On top. And didn't you guys, it was funny, it was legendary because apparently Jimmy said, rather than people take the elevator down, we're going to build a staircase down to their favorite restaurant canoe. And it was a staircase that went down to the restaurant from your offices.
I don't think they ever designed an elevator to the top floor. They had to put one in for wheelchairs eventually, but it was spectacular space because it used to host the Inuit Art Gallery for the Toronto Dominion Bank, which is now across the street in the South Tower. But it used to be up on the 55th floor, and then they figured out we can rent this out for a fortune.
Wow.
And Cadillac Fairview has, 2 family offices now in those buildings.
the legend was born there. Well, that's a great time. It was an amazing time to work. It was coming into a recession in 82 after a monstrous rise in interest rates. It's come through. We had a few big markets, of course, leading into 87 of the great crash. I was there on the floor and I went to the office pretty well 6 months before the crash happened. So that was a quick learning curve. And I'm sure we all have stories about that. But what brought you back to this business? You took some time off. First, what did you do after Gordon Capital? Where did you go from there?
I went to, it's now UBS Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So it was called Bunting Warburg.
Oh, yes.
So
I that was
then
a
turned
very
into
strong institutional firm.
Swiss Bank, Bunting Warburg. And it was right in those years at the end of Gordon Capital that with Vic Bradley, I co-founded Yamana Gold.
Right.
So we were literally in Ushuaia on the tip.
Now, was that with Peter Maroney?
No, Maroney came in a bit later, and it was an interesting story. He represented the Brazilian, Paulo de Brito, who owned Santa Helena mines. Yamana ended up effectively getting 15% of the vend-in.
Really?
By the Brazilian, now billionaire, Paulo de Brito. So worked very actively. Like the first great run, and you'll remember it well, was that sort of 90, 93 phase.
Yes.
And it was, Lucas Lundin in Argentina.
Right.
It was David Fennell in Guyana. It was Robert Friedland in
Diamond Fields, legendary. Boise Bay, 92, I think it was.
That's correct. And then he went Ven Gold in Venezuela. You had the guys from IM Gold build the first mine in West Africa. We did a private, and Ned Goodman invested in that deal. Legendary
investor, and now carried on by his eldest son Jonathan through Dundee Bancorp, and still around. And he's done a great job, and back to some of his roots. But Johnny's done a great job in Dundee Bancorp.
Well, Jonathan was a 15% shareholder in Union Gold, which again was David Fennell in Guyana 30 years later. 8 million ounces, and it was sold for $875 million.
And they've taken it higher. I was just talking to Patrick Sheridan today, who has the property on the other side of the border, a similar size deposit. Both deposits are between 4 and 5 million ounces. I think Patrick has an MRE coming out, but I think it's pretty easy to say that this camp will have 10 million ounces. And this is a world-class legendary camp. The G mining guys have taken it from when the purchase of $1 billion for a Union, their combined market cap, which is with a mine in Brazil, but I think the 80% of the value is inherent in Guyana, and their market cap is $6.5 billion. G2, which I think is very cheap, is at $1 billion. But it shows you that these people, Louis Pierre or his father, the Gidiac family, were there back in the Cambria, building that back in the 80s and 90s, and now they're back again with G money. I see the legends coming back. A lot of people. Robert Phelan's back in action. Lundin, of course, my good friend Lucas has passed away, but he's missed dearly by all his friends. But more importantly, he set the stage with 4 sons, Adam and Jack, who run the empire of Lundin Mining and Lundin Gold and the whole overall effort, followed by Will and Harry. But they've done an incredible job. I think they've taken it to heights that Lucas would be amazed at right now. So the families, the main mining families, have been very strong back in the market. The gold market's been great, $4,000. And now you've come back into the market. You've done lots of things. You created your own company after that, which was called Westwind. And now you're back again now and at a new firm, which I'm pleased to be a part of with you. And why did you come back to the market right now? What made you go on? Because I know what made me come back is I see a multi-year bull market. I said, I see it. I've seen it before in 2 different cycles. We're in a multi-year, and I'm going to say it's 7-year minimum, probably outside of 10 years.
Well, you're seeing some of the absolute smartest billionaires in the Canadian resource business plunging back in. And we saw it last year, right? We saw Eric Sprott investing heavily in multiple projects. I saw him in a company we're close to, BlackRock Silver. Pierre Lassonde is back.
You're right.
In size.
Very big in size.
Rob McEwen is back.
Sure. Biggest copper mine right now in Argentina.
Right. The guys from a Cisco ore back, right?
And you did that very early. I'm a big Sean Roos and John Brzezinski fan.
Yep.
And right now, the most profitable mine, and I think you know this because you were the seed financier of what that was, Queenston at the time, which taken over by Agnico, great management team. You got to congratulate all the people at Agnico, including Sean Boyd. They've taken Canada to be very proud of a $100 billion company in Agnico, hugely profitable. But they have one asset that Sean Rusin was really responsible for. It was his earmark and now run by Agnico called Malartic in Quebec. Tell us about Malartic when you were first there and what did you think it would get to?
So the Malartic story is extraordinary. It was bought out of bankruptcy for $85,000.
Wow.
And they succeeded in carving off the tailings pond to the south of the existing ore body and saying, Quebec government, you keep that. And the best bid into bankruptcy was Sean Rusin, John Brzezinski, and the geologist Bob Wares. And their concept was a 1 gram, large, disseminated porphyry-style ore body on the Abitibi Trend. And no one had ever...
Gold prices were at $800 at that time. Do they think that was going to be profitable, 1 gram material?
They needed the Barnat Zone, which of course you find underneath the Trans-Canada Highway. They then had to move a third of the town, about 250 people, built them all new homes and school and YMCA and rec center. What a
legendary story.
One of the best sort of social engagements you've ever seen. Another guy we know who was I'll just say the exploration manager for Lac Minerals for Eastern Canada, literally had his office sitting on top of this ore body. So Lac had been mining the high-grade underground. This is Craig Nelson.
Oh, Craig Nelson, okay.
He literally sat on top of this ore body, but it was Bob Wares who said, I think this is 10 million ounces. So the original Malartic mine, we built on time and within 10% of budget for $1.1 billion. We raised $875 million worth of equity. The Canada Pension Plan did a $150 million bond. And one of the Quebec entities did a $150 million preferred.
I think it was a case, yes.
A combination of case and FTQ.
Okay.
And one of the other entities. But the province was great. They actively supported it. And it's now 38 million ounces.
38 million ounces. Must be one of the biggest in the world next to the Bushveld.
Well, it's in the top 10 because there are some huge ones. Nevada would be the biggest.
Yes.
When you look at
Gold Strike.
A combination of Gold Strike and all of the Newmont mines.
Yes.
And then you got the old Placer Dome mines called Cortez. That's another Cortez Hills thing called Gold Rush. And again, 40, 50 million ounces was discovered there. But you got some big ones. Muruntau in Uzbekistan is number 2.
You never realize that, but there's a lot of these mines, and there's one in Indonesia.
Grasberg is technically a copper mine. It was called Erzberg Grasberg. And Erzberg in Dutch means ore mountain because literally the green copper mineralization stuck out of the ground like a spire in the middle of the jungle. And a Dutch geologist found it. Turned out to be the largest gold deposit in the world and one of the largest copper deposits.
Wow.
So it's been fantastic. So the question was, why'd you come back? At Westwood, what we loved to do was back great management teams. So, we led 4 deals in succession for a Cisco, right up to its takeover. Sentiment Egypt.
Another great play. Sentiment just got taken out not too long ago by Anglo Ashanti.
For $2.5 billion.
Yeah. And so you did that early days, Sentiment?
We did. I remember the guy came to our London office, told us a fantastic story in the corner office. And I grabbed Mikachuk, our great analyst who's the top junior guy at BMO now. I said, we got to go see this. So you fly to Cairo, flew to Hurghada on the Red Sea, took a bunch of Land Rovers into the desert. It was like Lawrence of Arabia.
Wow.
And a guy from Anglo Gold named Roger Spears pulled out the sections of the 5 kilometer long porphyry ore body, and every 25 meters turned a page and showed us exactly what it was. And I turned to Andrew and I said, this is 10 million ounces. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of pharaonic production. That meant it was the gold mine for the pharaohs.
Oh, well, they've been mining in Egypt for, wow, you saw
5,000 years ago.
5,000 years ago, yes.
And then the Brits had it as colonials. But this, again, was the same kind of concept, a large disseminated porphyry body that ended up being, 10 plus million ounces. And it's proud to say it's a 500,000 ounce producer on an
Wow, that's a great
annualized
story.
basis.
Throw me in a time machine back and to see the beginnings of these companies now. And I think we're on that verge again. Gold at $4,000. I remember coming on BNN about 4 years ago, and gold at about 1,200. And I said, gold's going to be it's going to for short term 3,000.
Yeah.
And I said, over the long term, it's going to hit 5,000. I think we hit 5,000 by mid next year, and I'm very confident. I think the flight from treasuries into gold is kind of a global phenomenon right now. And I think we're in for a long cycle. And like you said it very right. It's great to have a great gold company. I think there are many great companies out there, but it's key to back the jockey. A big thing that Harry Steele told me, you can have the greatest company or greatest property, but if you don't have the right people managing it, things fall apart. And the execution is, 9/10 of the opportunity on both cost and the ability to succeed. You agree with that, don't you?
Well, you're absolutely right. And Sean Boyd and his team is
living proof.
Is the example. Agnico used to be a quarter of the market cap of Barrick or Newmont. It now equals the combined market cap of Barrick and Newmont.
And it's
together.
Amazing to think of that.
So it's the number one producer, certainly in North America, and I'm not quite sure about some of the
I think it's
Soviets
in the top 5.
and others.
It's in the top 5 in the world, that's for sure. And it's incredibly valuable. And it's funny enough, Sean is still there going into the office. He's got great lieutenants below him, whether it be John Robitaille or it's going to be Alden Greenhouse, of great people working with the organization. Of course, Amar has done very well at the helm. And I think that company is going to continue to forge forward. They're printing cash right now, as any producer is, and that's where you want to go to. What do you think with the fact that we're starting into a cycle, but we don't have the depth in jobs available because 5 years ago there was not a gold market and not many people were going to mining school or doing a lot of geo work. So we've now imported a lot of talent from Australia. We've imported a lot of talent from other areas in Brazil. So South America and Australia have been historically mining centers, mining hubs. Now we're seeing that. Do you think Canada's in a position right now to regain their strength? We have a massive resource. The strength of Canada going forward, and the government realizes this, is in mining critical minerals, and that's where the generational asset's going to change. We saw the new budget come out, and you're seeing the Canadian government dedicate $2 billion to innovation in that sector. Do you think this is going to change the mentality of the way the next generation looks and where they're going to be working at?
I think we still have excellent students coming out of Queen's and UBC and U of T, the Lausanne School of Mining Engineering. But in terms of the macro, I agree with you. First, on precious metals, especially gold, why, if you were China, India, or any one of the other 100 nations that just were liberated with a big whack of tariffs 6 months ago, why would you want to continue to hold treasuries? So as treasury bonds turned into treasury notes, turned into treasury bills, I think it's highly unlikely, and the Chinese want to diversify away from the US dollar as the global trading currency. So you're probably seeing, if not outright selling of those bonds, because the yields have hung in there at 4%. They're not going up, they're not going down a lot. I think they're just letting their bonds mature, but they are clearly buying alternative assets, so gold and silver.
So you're talking fixed assets, which has always been a hedge against inflation. I think you're dead right there. I'm a very big believer that if you want to make money in the next 10 years, you got to have physical assets, hard assets. Gold being the number one replacement of currency. It's been a currency for 5,000 years. So I think that what we're looking at, silver as well as an industrial precious metal, also has lots of value, going back to its old new highs, just over $50. I think we're in a real big cycle, and Canada sits on the majority of resources. The one thing Canada has is lots of mining, lots of metals, and lots of oil. And that's two areas where I think that we have to see a shift. I think we are now seeing people come to Canada with that specific skill set, and buying properties in Canada, staking ground, and we're seeing new discoveries all the time. We're seeing that in our office. People come to pitch us. There's a critical minerals conference coming up. I just think it's a real magical time. I encourage all the young kids out there to go back to the roots and start taking some more classical courses in geology and science and things that really will change, not to just regard the technology boom that we've gone through, but I do think it is going to be something that is going to be very much in demand. And I think the job opportunity is going to be both rewarding profitably wise and I think from a standpoint of education wise.
Well, that facade of the Toronto Stock Exchange at 222 Bay, it used to be called the Toronto Mining Exchange.
Oh, really?
So it wasn't even called the TSE, it was called the Toronto Mining Exchange. And then somewhere in the early 60s, they decided they wanted to clean it up and get more emphasis on the Bell Canadas and the CPRs, and the banks have come to dominate market caps. But what you're seeing is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in these rare earths, in my view.
Why is that?
Well, I think I don't know how the U.S. and the G7 collectively got themselves in this position, but 95 to 98% of all refining and processing capability in the rare earths is in China.
Wow, that's a dangerous, because that rare earths is what feeds the defense industry,
Correct.
It feeds the aerospace industry, and you think
And magnets.
You think the amount of satellites that are being put up in the air right now is, I don't know how many, but I know there's a ton of companies right now racing that arms race, including Elon Musk and others, that are dominating this whole kind of technology world. And just look at it. Everyone has at least one phone in their family, and that's how we run the business. Everything is done through GPS. So that is a growing business. And that also is a really big user of rare earths, whether it be the phone industry, the mobile phone industry, or other areas.
It's incredible that Trump let himself be put in a position where in the recent trade negotiations with China and Xi, where he had to completely capitulate, right? The 100% tariff is gone, back to the way it was. They took off the export restrictions on the rare earths only for 1 year. It's not a long-term contract.
So he's now hitting the pedal to the floor. Let's reinvest significant capital, which we're seeing right now. And the Canadian government on their budget just passed a massive bill, and they call it a generational change. So
first you got to find all these ore bodies. There are some existing ones, and they're unusual. They're all different. Right, we're looking at one right now that's got 16 different heavy metals, battery metals, scandium, yttrium, just
sondium.
I literally have to get the young guys. We have a great team of people in our shop, and they went in and they researched all these metals and their uses. So what the world needs, or the Western world needs, is somewhere between Europe, Canada, and the States, probably. We need, 20, 30 years supply of these kinds of metals. And it's at least a 5-year ramp. Now the
I think
government,
it's more. I just heard that 7 private equity funds have raised between $1 billion, $3 billion each. So you're looking at $20 billion plus dollars been raised. They commit capital and then they spend it over 7 years. So in my view, you have a minimum of 7 years of capital deployment, which means you're going to have over 7 years of growth in this industry. I think we're just at the forefront. We don't have I can't think of many refining downstream capacity that we have. We just finance electric battery materials, a cobalt refiner in Cobalt, Ontario. And I hear they're looking to add a different circuit with rare earths, refined rare earths. There's one out in Western Canada with Sharky that's been around for a while, but I don't really know many downstream assets. And I think the U.S. is just enacting to open old historical refiners and deploying capital. And, names like tungsten and antimony, which, I haven't heard that since I was, a kid, tungsten stocks. And now they're very big, again, very big in the armament industry. So you look at weapon deployment right now, it's a sad thing to see, but there's wars all over the world and we're still witnessing 2 or 3 that are continuing on right now. So,
Well, the big change, and hats off to Trump for doing it, was he convinced sort of the entirety of NATO to increase their defense commitments up to 5%. Now it's a mix of 3.5% on defense and then another 1.5 on infrastructure that supports defense. Like if you have a pile of Leopard tanks in Germany, the bridges to Poland have to be strong enough to have tanks run across them and to have 50 tanks run across them. So there's a big spend going on right now.
Infrastructure.
Globally on defense, about 3.5 points up from the old target of 2. We just made a huge investment, I think $80 billion in that budget in our defense.
Wow.
And they're scrambling to figure out how to spend it. But there's also infrastructure. So, projects like the Ring of Fire that we're actively involved in.
Yeah, so that is
Ontario.
Juno. They're having great success. I know they've hit a new gold zone called Pluto, and the only public way to play that is through Northfield. I know Rob Cudney very well. He's had lots of successes. He's had Gold Eagle, he had FNX, so his exits have been great. So, yeah, I'm watching that very close, spending a lot of time there as well. And you know what? I think, from a standpoint of how to make money in this market, I think you have to look at do your research on what are the components that are needed for this industry. Do some background work yourself. The internet's a wonderful thing. And, when you look at, asking questions and finding out how ChatGPT works, it's an amazing tool to get information on what are the critical minerals that are used in certain areas, whether it's aerospace, whether it's defense. And then you reverse back. I know there's a new company that I just got in touch with and financed, Consolidated Lithium, that has bought a project from the Quebec government in partnership with the Quebec government called Cogeco. And it's an amazing heavy metal rare earth deposit, but it's going to take 3 years before they get infrastructure built, and they're working that right now. But I think these are going to be absolutely huge winners in the market. So look for these rare earths. I think that there's a big deposit in Greenland that is the only pure moly deposit, and they just did a massive transaction with Outokumpu, one of the world's biggest steel
Finnish
Finland company. Yeah.
Finnish.
So it's a global imprint. I agree with you because population-wise, we're quite small, but you look at Germany's 80 million people. You look at some of the other European countries in the G7, that's a powerful force.
One thing you're absolutely certain is Trump never wants to appear weak again in front of Xi when he goes in for one of these trade negotiations, and any president following him, right?
Correct.
Whether it's J.D. Vance or Gavin Newsom, they do not want to be under the thumb of a Chinese dictator dictating terms to them, because they can shut down their industry by squeezing the supply chain on these 20 metals. So I agree. You asked me why I came back, and I love working with those entrepreneurs. So here we see Sean Roosen back with a 6 million ounce deposit that could be twice that size at the Caribou, right?
Right.
In British Columbia in a Cisco development. Appian just put 450 million US dollars in as a loan, and he successfully raised
probably about the equivalent money if you take all the float they do as well.
Yeah, another 300.
Yeah.
I was looking at the figures this morning. So there's Sean Rusin going at it. John Brzezinski and Bob Wares have Gaspésie Copper. He thinks it's going to be 2 billion tons of about 0.36 copper. So that's the largest copper deposit in Eastern North America. Actively drilling it, developing it, they raised $100 million to do things. We're seeing Rob McEwen come up with new ideas. We are seeing Pierre Lassonde back people. We are seeing Friedland doing deals, interestingly, in battery metals.
And getting money from the richest people in the world, i.e. Saudi Arabia, the United Emirates. So it's become a global investment. And I think that is the most impressive thing of the strength of the people. You know, even the most recent transaction that saw Bob Quartermain come back and buy the Hemlo assets from Barrick. You know, we see a lot of these reworks. Tony McCooch, who's now running Discovery Soul, big success. And I think what we're going to see here is those individuals take them higher, and money begets money. Guys, JMM, just make money. Do not let this cycle go. You're going to have a huge Canadian cycle. Do your homework on who are the biggest producers, and you want to be on the next stage of production. That's where the money is. You got to be a cash flow producing company.
So we had a run, the run from 2000 to December of 2010 was 11 years long. Gold went from $275, where virtually every mine lost money, and it peaked out at $1,430. So it went up over 400%.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a good move. You know, gold is, in the last year, has gone from 2,500 as high as 4,360, backed off to 4,000, seems to be holding it. But you got to remember, mines produce a certain volume in terms of tons and then ultimately ounces of gold. If you just added $1,800 to the gross margin of that mine and it was profitable at the previous price,
that's huge.
The cash flows, and we just saw a number of the silver producers report in the last week.
IAMGOLD was up 16% on their report. Agnico had record numbers. Kinross, all these numbers are coming through on the producers. Now, let me get that straight. So you're saying back in the early 2000s, gold went up fourfold from, you said, roughly $300 to about
$1,400.
Yeah, $1,200, $1,400. Fourfold. Does that mean from 2,500, which is our base starting now, we could see gold at $10,000. I'm starting to believe that. I've not said it publicly, but I'm now starting to believe it. I know there's people like Eric Sprott that think that the U.S. dollar is going to decline or have a problem in the U.S. with the government being shut down. We don't trust the numbers that are coming out of the U.S. I think they're going to be, guessed right now because there's no one working to create that, and they'll all be restated starting next year. So very interesting to see here. They better get their act together in the U.S. and get the government back up and going, or we're going to have some serious problems. And that's going to translate into a weaker U.S. dollar, higher interest rates, and a poor market. I am going all in on gold. And that's brought me back. That's why I'm a gold bug by nature. I think this is a huge cycle. I don't think, I've seen this back, and when I started, I witnessed the 80s bull market in gold, and I saw companies go from 20 cents to $20. And it doesn't take much, but do your homework, buy and hold. There's always another trade, so there's always opportunity. And the only thing I suggest to all you investors out there is do not use margin in this market. If you're not forced to sell, you're forced to, you can keep it as long as you want. If you want to trade, trade no more than 20% of your position, or maybe 10% of your position. That's enough to keep the edge going and keep going and try to drive with profits into longer term dividend paying companies. Look at the royalty trusts. I think they're good, or the income trusts and royalty trusts that trade in this area. And I think that the royalty companies right now are going to be fantastic, led by Franco and Wheaton Precious Metals. But there's a lot of new ones coming out. Evolve just started with a couple of good royalties. We're going to see this area get bigger, and think of it, zero cost, all profitability. facility. They pay for it for production. And as that production grows, they get the benefits. So interesting way to play it, but they're trading at lofty prices now too, but they're great long-term holds.
So you asked about duration of the bull cycle and how long could it run? And why am I back? I'm looking at an 11-year run from 2000 to
Right.
2011 before it started to roll over. And you're looking at, your 4x multiple on a number of these commodities. Silver's already done it because it blew through the Hunt brothers record highs of the 70s,
That's
which I never
incredible.
thought we'd see again. On a global scale, Dr. Copper, the copper price, would tell you that things are okay. It's trading at $5 today. It's been steady in the 4 to 5.25 range when you take out the noise from Trump's copper tariff, which he immediately tacoed on, right? It disappeared.
Pull it back.
So copper is in the last couple of weeks more towards the top of that band of 5.25. So that tells you that something is happening globally, and you were talking about Saudi Arabia. My cousin ran the infrastructure practice for KPMG. He now works for the Saudi Monetary Authority, helping them deploy the cash.
Wow.
And one of the things they've done is to create a $2 billion fund that a Canadian lawyer out of Montreal is directing basically to Canadian and Australian companies to explore the Nubian Shield. So the eastern half of Saudi Arabia is the Great Big Dunes and Lawrence of Arabia. The western half, going over to Jeddah, is called the Nubian Shield. And it's the same minerals that were in Egypt, for Santam in Egypt, that are in Sudan, and then down into Tanzania. And when there was a great big rift that created the Red Sea, the Nubian Shield is sitting there. Barrick, Friedland, and about 20 Canadian juniors are applying their geoscience to a brand new terrain.
Now, Royal Road just concluded some of their early workings in Saudi Arabia. They partner with the largest construction company in Saudi, the Bin Laden family, and they also have a very unique project down in Colombia. So, Royal Road is exploring the potential in Saudi Arabia, but you mentioned that. I've heard by a few people, including Rob McEwen. So I'm very interested to see what's going on in Saudi. I think this year in February, I'm going to the Riyadh conference in Saudi Arabia. I hear it's going to be spectacular. So I'm going to try to make my way down there.
But you asked about Canada specifically. Generally, it's said that the best geochemical anomaly for a gold mine is an existing gold mine. Typically, these things, right? The LaRonde mine up in the Abitibi, Val-d'Or.
Oh yes, oh well.
That is only 20 miles from Canadian Malartic.
Yeah,
it's all on one trend. The eastern end of the trend was where Probe Metals just sold out for $800 million.
Wow.
Right, so their Novador project, which is just to the east of Val-d'Or.
I just looked at a map. There's been the whole mine. There's a whole bunch of projects that are owned. You see a lot of influence from Agnico there. You see a lot of influence from the guys at Alamos and IM Gold, El Dorado, and a couple of juniors in there. But that's a hell of a belt. And, there's a lot of prolific mines came out of that Abitibi belt.
It's hundreds of millions of ounces between Abitibi and then the Kirkland Lake Belt, which is immediately adjacent. So we have a great endowment, not far from here. It only takes an hour and a half on a plane to fly up there. You got a similar copper and copper gold endowment in the central Highland Valley. Copper is the giant
so you're
operation of
BC.
So now I'm in central BC, in the Central Valley of British Columbia. It's part of the big Rim of Fire Island Arc,
right?
Pacific Plate subducting underneath the North American plate, and the copper and the gold seemingly comes bubbling up, and there's conducive rocks for picking it up. So Taseko is there. You had Copper Mountain Mining, which got acquired by Hudbay. Island Valley Copper is 140,000 tons per day.
Wow.
And expanding. I believe Copper Mountain is about 65,000 tons, but has room to expand well north of 100. So we still have some very, very large mines in the various metals.
We're talking great wealth in Canada. So I think one thing to take away is I'm a proud Canadian. I believe that, we have huge resources, whether it be the Western Canada oil fields, the oil sands, which there was a massive transaction with Meg Energy and Cenovus on a merger. And I think that this will continue to be the forefront of our success because we are rich. Every part of Canada has a success story. I know Newfoundland has had great success in a bunch of rare earths and gold. I think that Ontario's been, prolific. I think the Ring of Fire is going to be a testimonial to a generation here. And David, it's great to have you back. It's great to have you back in the industry, and more importantly, to work with you at Altitude Capital. So, we got the team back together: Gene McBurney, David Beatty, and Michael Wekerle. We have a great group of associates and senior people, and led by Anu Prahar in our research. So, I thank you very much. Before we leave here, give me one stock that you think we should be watching at, and it's going to make a difference right now.
Well, first, thank you very much for the opportunity, and we are building a great team at Altitude/Integrity Capital and our registered dealer, and there are half a dozen great young people that work for us on a daily basis.
The key to success, no I in team.
You're talking to a tight head rugby prop that played for Queens. That's the idiot that's right at the front of the pack.
Wow.
Banging heads, and it only worked if all 8 people bound together and pushed. So a great forward pack, and we saw it with the Canadian women in the World Cup on the summer. They are extraordinary. They pass fearlessly, and you gotta work that way. So I feel strongly that way. You got to pick your commodities. So we'd have a couple, but first of all, in silver, BlackRock Silver would be our number one play. It's not quite as big as the Fortune.
So you like the emerging side of the market. So let's go one. So BlackRock would be your junior pick.
So BlackRock's 100 million ounces of silver headed to 200 million. Brownfield, patented claims in Nevada. Clear takeover target eventually.
And
for one of the large
if you're
producers.
sitting there as a retiree and you want something safe, but you want to participate in this market, what big cap gold stock would you recommend to everyone who would be watching this podcast? Is you need a little bit of this in your portfolio?
Well, I think you got to own Agnico because of the quality of the management team.
So there we are, guys. Agnico, for the quality of management, long-term growth, $100 billion company. It's going to probably, go to significantly higher. And we're very bullish on gold. We're bullish on the commodities here. And take a look at all the rare earths that go into the defense industry and to the aerospace. With that note, we're going to end this podcast. Thank you very much, David, for coming on board.
Thank you.
And thank you, crowd. Stay tuned for the next episode of WekWorks. Just make money. Thank you very much.